Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos a mais uma live muito especial do Brasil Fantasy Football BRFF, o seu canal de fantasy no Brasil. Eu sou André Amaral e hoje recebemos mais uma fera do fantasy internacional, Bob Lang, do Big Guy Fantasy Sports e autor do Guia de Consistência do Fantasy Football, uma das publicações mais premiadas da indústria do fantasy. Além disso, ele é um dos organizadores da The Fantasy Football Expo, um mega evento anual que reúne dezenas de especialistas e analistas de fantasy, a ser realizado dia 15 de agosto em Canton, Ohio, lar do Hall da Fama da NFL e a cidade natal do Bob. Já deixando claro que a gente vai tentar legendar essa live nos próximos dias, eu passarei alguns recados e depois faremos a dinâmica com o Bob toda em inglês para não ficar muito travado, beleza, pessoal? Mas fica com a gente, mesmo se o seu inglês não for totalmente fluente, porque vale muito a pena e você ainda terá a chance de concorrer a vagas no nosso BRFF Bowl, o Scott Fishbowl brasileiro, que reúne diversos perfis brasileiros de NFL e contribui com as obras sociais Irmã Dulce ao final do programa. Well, good evening, Bob. Thank you very much for being here with us. It's our huge pleasure to welcome you to the show tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Longtime friends, one of those things where we just kind of know each other from Twitter and the fantasy Twitter world. But here we are, my second international podcast, and very excited and honored to be a part of this, guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's our huge pleasure. Well, before we start, I'll just send some messages in Portuguese and introduce my fellow colleagues so they can say their greetings to you and those watching us, okay?
Got it.
Ok. Bom, então convidar vocês que estão assistindo a participar aqui no chat, perguntas, comentários, cornetadas, o que vocês quiserem. Curtam o vídeo, se inscrevam no canal. Tem que estar inscrito no canal, seguindo o nosso perfil e o do Brasil Dynasty, que é o @BrasilDynastyFF no Twitter, e participar com pergunta ou comentário durante a live para participar do sorteio das vagas do BRFF Bowl ao final da transmissão. Também fica o convite para você assinar o BRFF pelo site, tem as opções de plano anual e semestral. No anual você ganha a segunda edição do livro do Fantasy Football, além da mentoria com a nossa equipe, e no semestral, assim como no anual, o acesso exclusivo ou antecipado aos artigos especiais e o Draft Kit, que está para sair. Lembrando que o site oferece 7 dias de teste grátis, hein, gente? Então é só se inscrever, testar por 7 dias e continuar assinando o BRFF. E você que joga fantasy e vê as ligas internacionais com prêmios, mas por aqui não encontrava essa opção, pois saiba que chegou. É o Big Ball Fantasy Leagues. Agora você pode jogar a sua liga com prêmios no Brasil. No bigballfl.com você encontra ligas Best Ball, ligas de temporada e até mesmo Dynasty, todas com prêmios ao final. O que você está esperando para se juntar a uma galera e se divertir ganhando prêmios em ligas de fantasy? bigballfl.com, o maior site de bolão de ligas de fantasy do Brasil. Bom, vamos lá apresentar a nossa bancada. Novamente comigo, o Chefia, o nosso guru das analytics, do IDP, de tudo mais relacionado ao fantasy, meu grande amigo Rui Maurício. Tudo bom, Chefia?
Tudo bom, André? Boa noite, galera. Good evening, Bob. It took a long time to have you here, but here it is. Thank you very much to be here with us.
Yeah, Rui, it's like I said, it's an honor, and it's been great working with you guys. I'm honored to have your consistency for IDP and the consistency guy for the past 2 years. I get a lot of great comments about it, and you guys do an amazing job with it, and I'm honored that you took my concept and my calculations and put it to good use on the IDP side. It's not something I play that often, but I always felt it was important, and you guys stepped up and took it. And I'm just honored and glad that you guys are a part of this, and appreciate you supporting me. And I hope you enjoy my support as well, because I think it's a great team we have.
Yeah, it definitely is. Rui is our main guy here. Também com a gente.
He's the man. I know that. I know who the man is.
Também com a gente essa noite, novamente, Sérgio Luiz, meu grande amigo, ajudando aí na pilotagem do StreamYard e sofrendo com flusão na Libertadores, né, Sérgio?
Faz parte. Hello, Bobby. Thanks for coming here. It will be a learning experience from you. Thank you for everything you taught Rui, because he taught us a lot too.
Honored to be a part of it. Thanks for having me on again.
E para terminar nossa bancada, meu co-host esta noite, o nosso Lorde inglês, Derek Bissigini. Tudo bom, meu amigo?
Opa, tudo ótimo. Boa noite, todo mundo. Hello, Bob. Thank you for having us here tonight. It would be a pleasure to just learn a lot from you in this amazing lesson. So yeah thank you.
No, thank you. And another thing I forgot to thank you guys for is taking this to your area, to your country. We in America live and breathe this stuff, fantasy football. And I think it's great when I see this spread out internationally, not just the consistency, just fantasy football in general. I mean, it's very simple. Obviously, we have a lot of Canadian folks and some Mexico and, obviously a lot of British. But we've got Australia. I've got somebody in South Africa that, we know and are in the King's Classic together with. And so I just think it's great that you guys are taking this all to South America and spreading the love of fantasy football and consistency across the globe from your perspective and your language. And I just think that's awesome. And I appreciate everything you guys have done.
Wow, it's our huge pleasure. And fantasy football is really growing global and exponentially. Well,
definitely.
Yeah. Bob, let's start out talking about this very special event called the Fantasy Football Expo that you are part of. You are one of the organizers, right? How long has it been held, and what will we find in this year?
So this is our second year. We actually started in 2019, and then, last year didn't happen. So we just don't even talk about it. So this is our second year doing this. And it's called the Fantasy Football Expo. The website is just simply that, thefantasyfootballexpo.com. And the idea was basically to bring the fantasy community together to not only share amongst ourselves, but really to help the attendees that just always wanted to come to an event and maybe meet their favorite fantasy experts, analysts, whoever in the industry. And so I kind of decided, since I live in Canton, Ohio, which is home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, that it would be a cool place to have a kind of a whole weekend affair where we've got the King's Classic drafting at the Hall of Fame on Saturday. We have the Expo on Sunday. We're going to have lots of parties. Everybody's liver is going to be shot at the end of the weekend. We're going to be drinking way too much, eating way too much, but that's the fun of it. So it's something we just decided to put together, and hopefully I'm looking forward to the day that you folks can make it up and be a part of it as well. We have, we don't have any international attendees yet because I don't count Canada as international. And that's only if they open the borders. But hopefully down the road, it's going to be a very international affair and people from all over the world will come to it. So very excited about that. And thanks for bringing that up. Definitely going to be a good time.
Yeah, definitely.
Very nice. Another cool thing we have together is the King's Classic that you mentioned before. Mm-hmm. So how did it start? What's the story behind it, and what will we have this year?
So the King's Classic kind of came about because I used to play a lot of fantasy baseball as well when I was younger, and the one thing that I always kind of heard on fantasy sports radio was every year the fantasy baseball world had these two really big expert drafts called the Tout Wars and Labor, which was an acronym. And they would do it at super cool places, like in the studios at SiriusXM in New York City. The one year they did it in the Staten Island AAA Yankees locker room, and they had their names on lockers and just all kinds of cool things in the way they were doing it. And I said, what's really sad? We don't have this in fantasy football, and fantasy football's, a million times bigger than fantasy baseball. No pun intended, sorry for you fantasy baseball players. And it's like, why do we not have a best of the best draft somewhere? And I'm like, hey, again, I live here in Canton, Ohio. What would be the coolest place to hold a draft but the Pro Football Hall of Fame? So I reached out and emailed Mike Clay from ESPN, who's a friend of mine. And I said, hey, Mike, here's my idea. We should do this. What do you think? And within 5 minutes, he forwarded me an email that Brad Evans had sent to him the week before. And Brad was with Yahoo at the time. And said, you know what, we should do this like big national best of best expert draft, but I can't think of a cool place to have it. Yeah, I got it. Pro Football Hall of Fame. So that's how we came together in 2018, and we put the draft together with Brad's help. recruited all the best in the country, website wise, people wise, whatever you want to name it. And so we had 2 leagues of 14 teams each. We do 2 drafts, 1 auction and 1 snake for each division, so that everybody kind of has their chance of proving who they're the best at snake drafts or auction drafts. And we did that for the first 3 years, or actually, 3 years, 18 and 19, 2 years. Last year, of course, couldn't meet face to face. So in that kind of coming around, and now I'd made kind of acquaintances, and we've been working with you folks, Rui, and everybody here at Brazil Fantasy Football. And then there was Murph and Stocks from England, and a bunch of guys from Canada and Australia. And like I said, I'm like, we need to include you guys, because you're part of this worldwide love affair we have for fantasy football. So I decided, hey, since we're all going to be online anyway, why don't we just create a 3rd league, and it will be online every year, so that we can include folks like you and people from around the world. So we created another division, and we have 7 international sites. We have 7 then American sites that were kind of new people going to, or old people going to new places, or just new sites kind of popping up. And we created the Dawson division. And so last year we had a 3rd division, and I know you folks were in it, and I'm glad you enjoyed it and had a good time. And so we're coming back this year, and we're really excited about that. We are going to be going live for the other 2, and the 3rd one will be online. And so we're very excited about that, and just actually added a new person to the Dawson division, the probably youngest fantasy expert out there, Hutchinson Brown. So we're very excited to add him to the draft, and he was very excited. His dad surprised him by bringing him to the expo, kind of bought him tickets as a surprise. And so I reached out to Andy, Brad, Mike, and said, hey, we got an opening. Why don't we, let's bring the kid in. Let's go with some youth, so that, he can run the King's Classic 20 years from now when I'm too old to do it. But again, I appreciate you guys being a part of it, and I'm glad we can do this internationally, and looking forward to that on Saturday, August 14th.
That's just awesome. Awesome. Well, let's talk a little about your specialty, okay? Where did the need for consistency as a fantasy football subject come from, and how did you come up with the idea?
So I guess it had actually been put together by others before me. So I kind of came up with my calculation, my idea in 2002. Tristan Cockcroft, who writes for ESPN, said that he was publishing stuff in 1999 about consistency, but he just kind of put it out there as data and didn't do much with it. So it wasn't like I was taking an idea or stealing an idea. I just felt it was important, and it was because I was in a league, and it was a touchdown only league, because that's what my team or league I've been in since 1985, scoring method. And 2002 made it, I had the best running back in the league in Sean Alexander, but I went 7-7 in the regular season, didn't make the playoffs. And I was very disappointed in that, because I'm like, well, how can I have such a high scoring team and my team didn't make the playoffs? And so what I realized is that Sean's season was very inconsistent. And since it was touchdown onlys, he had 5 touchdowns in one game on a Monday night. He had 3 touchdowns in another game and 2 in another. So basically he had 10 out of his 15 touchdowns in 3 out of those 14 games. So obviously there were a lot of 0 weeks for me. So I kind of just manually figured out, like, if he would have scored just 1 touchdown every week, or maybe 1 or 2 touchdowns every week, and spread out that 15, that I would have won 2 more games, made the playoffs, and won the championship. So it was at that point I'm like, man, if he could have just been more consistent, that would have been a heck of a lot better for my team than, having a lot of points, but kind of doing it in an inconsistent manner. And so long story short, that started in 2002. Started writing articles, putting data together. My brother-in-law had a computer programming background, so he created some database stuff for me. And now, of course, all those reports are online. You can put in your own scoring method, figure out who the most consistent players are on your team from last year, year before, whatever you want to go back, number of years wise. And, that's kind of how this all got to this point. And it was a fun hobby that's becoming, a bad obsession according to my wife.
So you talked a little bit about the importance of consistency. Sure. And how does this approach stand out compared to the traditional way of making some sort of analysis and things like that? What do you look more into when it comes to consistency that a normal analysis would pass by?
Well, I think what the whole idea was to show people that you can't just look at the total points. Perfect example from the guide is, one I kind of use all the time now is Tyler Lockett. Last year was 8th in total points. So you think, man, he's a top 10 wide receiver. Man, I should draft him in the second round. He's going to be awesome. Look how many points he scored. The problem was he was only 50% consistent. So that means half of those games he scored under 11 points for you while he exploded in the other weeks. And, again, a guy like that, you have 3 or 4 of those guys on your team. And at the end of the year, you're in the same situation I was in 2002. Your team doesn't make the playoffs, but you're one of the higher scoring teams in the league, and you can't figure out why. It's probably the consistency that's throwing you off. So that's why we think it's, we kind of look at it as it's important to use as another tool. I mean, the one thing I will say in every podcast I do and every time I'm on is, this book is not the end all. Do not just buy this book and think that this is going to win you the league. It's going to help, but you want to combine it with your own analysis, getting some other data, getting some other information from other sites that can help you fine tune your draft rankings so that when you go in that you have that edge because you have some different approaches and some unique twists to the data that can help you make the difference between choosing an inconsistent player like Tyler Lockett versus a consistent player like a DK Metcalf or a Chris Godwin.
Nice, that's awesome. And can you walk us through your methods and or formulas to define each player's consistency? Are there any differences between the positions that they play?
Well, definitely there's difference in the positions. So the calculation, while I won't go into the whole algebraic of it, it's pretty much what it's trying to do is identify what I call the clutch factor by position. So for each position, it takes like the top, let's say quarterbacks, top 30, 35 quarterbacks, and gets an average fantasy points per game. And that number usually will place you in the top 12 quarterbacks for that week. So, for example, last year, I think the quarterbacks was like 20.5. And so every time a quarterback earns over 20.5, and this is like 4 point per passing touchdown, by the way, 20.5 fantasy points, they earn a clutch game. For every clutch game that you accumulate, that just gives you a higher consistency ranking, so a rating. So if you do, like I said, 12 out of 15, you're at 75%. And that's a very good number. Anything over 60 is pretty good. Anything over 70, 75 is very good. And then if you get over 80 to 90, then you're elite. But that's kind of the calculation. Then it changes, of course, then running backs are a little bit lower. It's about 11 points. I think wide receivers are around 11, and tight ends are usually about 8 to 9. And again, regular PPR scoring, nothing fancy. But that's what's cool about, so that report that's on Big Guy Fantasy Sports right now, you can go in and put in your scoring method. And if you have a 14-team league or a 10-team league, it'll automatically adjust that clutch factor based on your method. So maybe if your quarterbacks get 6 points for passing touchdowns, now your clutch factor may be 22.5. So it'll certainly go up because you're getting more points in your stats each week. So that's why when I created this, I wanted to be very adaptable for people to be able to use it regardless of their league scoring. I didn't want it just to be, well, if you don't play PPR, that's too bad, and that's the only way we're going to track it. No, that doesn't make any sense. Not everybody plays that way. So that was important to me, that the consistency report was flexible and adaptable and adjustable based on your scoring methods. So that's kind of how it kind of gets determined, how it gets calculated.
Perfect. So, in your opinion, or according to the whole consistency rankings and stuff, for you, for 2021, what are the most consistent and the least consistent player that you could pinpoint a few, at least one or two for each position?
Right.
So,
So I mean, you know,
just write down here.
Well, of course, if you get the guide, it's easier to figure out. No, I'm just kidding. So, you know, the quarterback position, obviously, you know, Patrick Mahomes is the number one most consistent quarterback, and by far. So he was 93% last year. The second place quarterbacks were Josh Allen and Josh Allen. Who else? I should know this. Let me find my sheet. I knew there was somebody else at 75. Oh, yeah, Kyler Murray. Sorry. So Kyler Murray, you know, second and third, but at 75%. So, you know, certainly kind of, you know, so there's a significant difference. And, you know, that's why people are drafting Patrick Mahomes in round 2 this year. And Kyler and Josh are falling into rounds 4 and 5. There's a big difference. And, you know, let's be honest, that's pretty impressive when you realize that Mahomes was hurt with that bad foot most of the, you know, especially near the second half of the year going into the playoffs, and still pulled off, you know, pretty impressive year at 93%. And again, but that's why people are drafting that high. You know, running backs, I mean, you know, all the big boys, you know, Christian McCaffrey, granted he was hurt, but, you know, he's always around 90 to 100%. Dalvin Cook was 90%. Kamara was up there. I think he was 88%. So, you know, those guys, but I mean, we all know that from these guys. I mean, the important thing is to find the guys that, you know, might be more consistent, but their ADP, their average draft positions a little bit farther down. So you can find some value in consistency. And, you know, that's the kind of stuff we try to kind of pinpoint for people, because they kind of look and go, oh, well, yeah, we know McCaffrey's good. We know, you know, these other guys are good. But we just want to, you know, kind of watch them all. But yeah, I mean, the people you think that are consistent usually are. I mean, you kind of know. Every once in a while, you'll get surprised by like a Tyler Lockett or you know, like last year, Dak wasn't very consistent, which was rare. But, you know, or not Dak, I'm sorry, Ezekiel Elliott. But that was because Dak got hurt, and then the offensive line started falling apart, and, you know, there just wasn't a lot of motivation in Dallas for him to do well. But I expect him to be right back in that 80, 90% this year. And, you know, again, and there's value there, because I've done some drafts already where I'm picking Zeke at like number 7. I mean, before it was like, if you didn't give him top 3, you would even sniffed Ezekiel Elliott. But now if I can get him at number 7, I'm pretty giddy about that. So I'm sure as time goes on and the preseason comes and he starts running and showing that he's back to normal, I'll bet he'll be back up in that 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. So, but yeah, I mean, those are some of the guys that, you know, you'll find some good consistency at.
Perfect.
Nice. So, Rui, do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Going back to 2020, how was it in terms of consistency? Was it an outlier, or did the players behave accordingly in terms of consistency?
I mean, I would say probably, you know, 80% of the players are pretty close to where you expect them to be. It's like you said, it's the outliers that you kind of catch. But, you know, the one thing that I really try to promote in the guide is to try to identify those guys that has some good consistency in streaks or in stretches, maybe it's second half of the year, first half of the year, you know, or then got injured. To kind of remind people that, hey, don't forget about those guys. And like one of my favorites so far this year is Russell Gage, who's wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons. Now, last year when Russell Gage filled in, when Julio Jones was out for 7 games, he put up a 71% consistency during those games, which is very good, especially for somebody that you really don't know much about heading into that. And I actually had him as an undervalued player, as a top 36 ranking before they traded Julio Jones away, because I felt like there was a good chance he might be more involved in the offense. But obviously once Julio was traded to the Titans, I just feel like he's such a great value right now because of what he did with Julio out of the picture. The surprising thing is his ADP is still like wide receiver 55 to 60. So he's not getting a lot of love. And if he can put up a 65, 70% consistency, he's easily a wide receiver 3. And if you can draft him as your wide receiver 5 or 6 and get that kind of value out of him where you can at least start him as a flex every week if you have 3 even better receivers, that's great value. And that's what you're looking for with consistency. And I'm sure you guys know this as you promote your IDP consistency, is that there's those guys that, just kind of undervalued from an ADP standpoint because people just didn't see the consistency or don't get the consistency concept. They just see them as maybe not as high in total points. And I think that's what's the important factor here.
When you talk about Russell Gage, you talk about my secret love for this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
who loves draft in every league who plays against us or with us. It's just round 9, round 10, round 8. But Russell Gage and Rui teams every time.
Well, Rui must have got he might have got the guide a little sooner. Probably was sniping him before anybody knew about him. So
yeah, definitely. So as you can see, he has been in the right path as always. Well,
as always.
So Bob, what about the players without previous stats in the NFL? Which rookies, if any, might be more consistent for the 2021 season?
Well, in the guide every year, because I would get this question every year from every folks about, Bob, how do we track consistency for rookies? What do we expect from rookies? What are we going to get? So I started tracking that. And so there's an actual article in the guide called Rookies versus Consistency. Are they worth drafting? And what it showed was, so I went back, so I think it's about 12 years now. It's from 2010 all the way through this past year. And what it shows is that of the 470 some players drafted in the first 4 rounds at just the quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end position, of those about 470 people, only about 9% of them actually earn over a 60% consistency rating in their first year. Running backs are a little bit higher. They're at 16%. Quarterbacks are around 9 to 10. Wide receivers, I think, around 8, a little bit below the average. Of course, tight ends are like 2%. But it just shows that sometimes you got to be careful taking that risk just because they were great in college. Certainly there's players that come out and they just explode in the NFL. Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Julio Jones. I mean, we've seen all of these guys do that. So it's not impossible. But what it shows is that 92% of all of these guys drafted aren't earning over a 60% consistency in their rookie season. So, are there guys that are going to break out? Yeah, I mean, certainly a guy like Jamar Chase can do something. Najee Harris at Pittsburgh certainly is going to get all the opportunities in the world to be productive. So again, that's really what it's about, is do they have the opportunity from day one to, be a significant part of the targets and touches in that offense? Najee Harris is a perfect example of that. He's going to get that chance in Pittsburgh. Does that mean he's going to be 60 or 70% consistent for the year? Don't know. He may not break out. I mean, we certainly have seen players in the first round that have come out and get picked very early as a running back and get the starting job and not hold on to it because the NFL moves a little too fast for them. So, I always say kind of temper the expectations. If you want to draft some rookies after you draft your kind of core starting lineup for your fantasy league, or your fantasy team, that's fine. If you want to take a flyer on, or maybe not a Russell Gage, but, somebody in the 8th, 9th round, that's fine. But the problem is most of the highly touted rookies with some opportunity are going to go up before that. But, like I was in the FSGA draft here just a couple of weeks ago, and it's 14-teamer. And, I picked David Montgomery in the 2nd round before Najee Harris. And, the guys were like, why did you do that? Najee Harris is going to be, the man for the Steelers. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. But David Montgomery was 88% consistent in the second half of last year. He's proven he can do it in the NFL. I don't know if Najee Harris can. If you want to take that chance and pick him in the 2nd round, all right, go ahead. That's fine. But it doesn't always work out. So I usually kind of stay away from them. But again, don't hate rookies, because that's always everybody's question. We heard you hate rookies. No, I don't hate rookies. I just don't feel comfortable drafting them too early. That's my statement. I certainly would love to have a couple of rookies that, I might believe in, but not that early, not second round, when I have all kinds of other good, proven consistent NFL veterans that should be able to go out and do it. But, again, that's kind of the whole thought process on the rookies.
Yes. CH was an example, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was really hyped going the first round in a few drafts, and he did okay, but not enough for the draft capital that most people drafted in the end. So yeah, it's really good to have stop and see if everything is going according to the plan, or just don't jump in the gun. Or right.
But you know what? CEH is a perfect example of how the hype from the year before and the disappointment can lead to some really good value this year. I have CEH on a lot of my teams that I've drafted so far as my RB2. Because last year he was going in the first round, sometimes middle of the first round. But you know what? He was 77% consistent, and he was injured over the last 4 games. So if he can be healthy, their offensive line has now improved greatly. And you can get him as your RB2, man, that's a great value. So like you said, sometimes that kind of helps you in the second year. If you didn't get burned by him the first year, you can take advantage of that disappointment that everybody else has with him and get him at a great value. I remember Todd Gurley a number of years ago, early in his career, he kind of came out, did okay, highly picked, did okay, didn't do great, but did good enough. And then the next year, I remember drafting him as my RB2, and that was his big season, and I did really well with that. So again, that's the kind of stuff we kind of look for, is that proven consistency, which was good enough. And now if you can get him for a value, second, third round RB2 kind of scenario, that's where that kind of stuff can really come in handy.
Perfect. So right now we'll pick a few questions from the chat.
Okay.
So this one will translate to you pretty quickly. So Leo, he would like to know, in a Dynasty League, IDP, PPR, 32 teams. Oh, that's a lot of teams.
Ooh,
which would be better to draft wide receiver 4 who might have a few touches by the end of the draft, or draft a rookie that will be temper in the NFL, so to speak. For example, Elijah Moore or so. This kind of rookies that's not in the hype. There's a lot. Yeah, Nico Collins is another example. They will not be a started. They will not start immediately, but they have the chance to have this way there. So which would do rather.
I think I don't play in a ton of dynasty leagues, but the ones I do, it's all about youth. It's all about getting. Now, if you're wide receiver 4, your draftings may be in their second year or third year, so they're not real old. There certainly could be some good values. Russell Gage could be a perfect example. He may still be available because maybe he wasn't drafted by teams in the past. So again, I think you have to look at what's available there and kind of do that comparison of, value versus youth. The guy's coming out, that guy may ask, if you go rookie wise, now Elijah Moore certainly will probably be a starter for the Jets and certainly has that potential to be very valuable. But, if you're going for, Anthony Schwartz from the Browns, got drafted, I think round 6 or 7, super fast kid, has some potential, but he's got Rashard Higgins, Jarvis Landry, and Odell Beckham ahead of him. Now, this kid, maybe in 2 years, maybe Odell, goes away, maybe Richard goes away, whatever. He could move into a spot, especially with injuries too, could be a really good value. But again, you might have to wait 2 years. But it's dynasty, so that's the thing is you have that time to wait. So it's a little dynasty to me is a lot more difficult than just regular redrafts by far. Probably why I don't play in a lot of them because I'm usually not very good at it. Because I'm drafting guys who are very. I remember in a dynasty draft I was 2 years ago. I drafted Larry Fitzgerald. I'm like, I love him. This guy's like 80% consistent, and they're like, this is a dynasty league, right? He's like 30 years old. I go, yeah, but he's Larry Fitzgerald. He'll never get old. He'll never die. He's like Jerry Rice. He'll play forever. But again, you got to kind of look at the youth and the value. And so if you can get a young, good player, and that's your wide receiver 4, that's great. But if most of those are gone and you don't see a lot of value there, or they're older players, then yeah, go to that youth movement. If you can get Elijah Moore, Devontae Smith, those kind of guys, that's great. But they may go a lot sooner than that because it's Dynasty League.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob. In your experience, consistency is more related to a player's ability or to a system? And to a question here that is related to my question is how much consistency is affected when a player changes his team?
That's a great question, and I like that. It does matter. I mean, certainly a very good player should be, consistent everywhere, but it's not always the case. Changing teams, changing schemes, let's take a perfect example of this. Julio Jones, very good player, little up in years now. Now he kind of becomes the second favorite or second best receiver on his team with AJ Brown, who's the, young up and comer. Where will Julio's numbers go to? What will happen? And that's the kind of stuff you kind of have to look at and decide, you can look at it two ways. One, you can say, well, A.J. Brown's still the man. He's worked with Tannehill for years, so Julio Jones' numbers will drop. Could be. Here's another thing to look at. Not being with the best cornerback every game, because now the best cornerback on that team has to focus on A.J. Brown. Now he's going against the second best cornerback, which may be easier for him to dominate. And so now he may see more targets because there's a shutdown corner on A.J. Brown. So I think that, you have to look at kind of everything of what's going on, where they're going to. Certainly, are they sharing targets and touches? Kenyon Drake going to the Raiders certainly screws up both him and Josh Jacobs. So yeah, all those things are very important. You kind of have to evaluate each on a case-by-case basis. Same way with coaching and systems and offensive coordinators. Do they like to run the ball more? Do they like to pass more? If a good running goes to Seattle, he's certainly going to see an uptick in targets if, he's taking Chris Carson plays. If he goes to a Arizona team that's going to throw the ball a lot, certainly there's more benefit as a wide receiver. So everything kind of comes into play. There's no, perfect algorithm calculation that says, hey, if you're here and they're there and this is the OC and, boom, they're going to be 80% consistent. But, you can kind of at least keep it in a range, and that's what we try to do.
Nice. And Bob, what about baseball? Can we forget all about consistency, or does it still have its value in this format? If so, how does it apply?
I think it applies, it's certainly, I won't say it has less value, because if they're consistently good every week, obviously we want that. We want the Christian McCaffreys and Dalvin Cooks and, all those kind of players. But, I still feel that there's a benefit because you want to get, again, I still look at the core starting team when you're drafting, and you want to still have those 8 guys provide that very solid floor. Because if you do, and that team, that group is going to average or be above average on a weekly basis, then maybe after round 7, maybe round 6, maybe you start a little bit earlier, again, then you grab a Tyler Lockett, then you grab, some inconsistent wide receivers. Deshaun Jackson used to be one of those guys. Mecole Hardman, Demarcus Robinson, those guys that will give you like 4 30-pointers, but won't do anything in the other games. And I think if you could still combine some consistency with that upside and that potential, then I think that's I've had some very good success in best ball leagues. Like I play a lot of those MFL 10s where you put in $10 and, you win 100 if you win. I think I cashed in about 3 of them last year out of about 10. So I didn't think that was too bad. It's fun. It's a nice play to play to maybe earn a little bit of extra cash. I'm certainly not going to go buy 100 teams, but because I got 30 redraft leagues to run. But I think it's fun, and I think you can utilize that consistency. And again, kind of the same thing I talked about before, finding those kind of undervalued guys. So you can get a Russell Gage who might be consistent and scoring a lot of points in round 7 or 8 because people don't think about him. They don't look at him as having a lot of value yet because they don't see the numbers kind of in those games behind the scenes. They just see, oh, well, he was, 40th or 50th or 60th in total points, didn't do that much. So, whatever. Those are the kind of people we can grab, an Emmanuel Sanders, a Rashard Perriman for Detroit, John Brown for the Raiders. All these guys have very good potential to put up a lot of very solid numbers. And I think they're both great redraft late picks, but also very solid best ball draft picks because they will score a lot more points and it gives you just more options to choose from on a weekly basis.
Perfect. I have one question. When it comes to consistency, once again, it's more easier to find the consistency in a quarterback, in a running back, in a wide receiver. Sometimes even in an IDP, a specific linebacker or so, or even as a whole system in the defense and special teams. It's a bit more tricky, but you can find some consistency from year to year. But I don't see the same consistency in the same way when it comes to kickers. Why is that really tricky? For example, the kicker from I forgot his name. Chiefs, the Butker.
Oh, Harrison Butler.
Yeah. So he was like a kicker, the first one in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. Right. And last year he was really bad, and this year probably they'll try to draft Bass from the Bills ahead of everyone else. And I don't know if he'll probably suck or So why is that so difficult to find some sort of consistency when it comes to kickers?
I think the biggest problem is that because of the way the offensive scores, people always say, well, you grab the kickers from the highest scoring team. And I don't agree with that because here's the problem. Somebody like Kansas City that scores 5 touchdowns a game, they scored 35 points. Your kicker only gets 5 points. So what you really want to look for, and I have not tracked this. So if that's your guys' next project that you want to take over IDP or consistency for kickers, be my guest. I have a feeling it's not going to be good. So the idea is to go out when you're looking for kickers is to find the teams that have a decent offense, can move the ball well, especially run the ball well, and have a very good defense on the other side. Because what that does is by having a good defense and keeping the other team in check, now becomes a field goal competition. Because this team drives down, they get 3 points because they don't have the offense to put it in the end zone. So they have a good defense, so they hold the other team, to another field goal. So next thing you know, it's 15-12, and it's 5 field goals versus 4. Now you scored some points as a kicker. But even that, the only problem with that is it could also be a game that's 6-3 or 10-7, and so It's a tough call. Kickers, I've never tried to track it. I'm sure, I could just use the same calculation. I've never done kickers, never done team defenses, kind of the same thing. And I think the other reason is that at the end of the year, most of the top 12 kickers are all within like 20 points of each other. So it really doesn't matter. And I just feel like there probably isn't much difference consistency-wise as well, that they're all probably going to be around 60% based on the clutch factor, and nobody's really going to stand out. I mean, again, Harrison Butker and, Justin, the guy from the Baltimore, I just lost Justin Tucker. Yeah. You can see I really have a love for kickers. Those are kind of guys that kind of do it every year, kind of like Adam Vinatieri used to. But you're still going to draft them around 15 or 16. And, you might get lucky and get like Young Ho Ko from last year from Atlanta, who did really well and nobody had ever heard of the guy. And, kind of all over the place. Like this year, I like Matt Gay from Tampa because, hey, let's be honest, the Bucs are going to move the ball well. They'll score points, but I think they'll kick a number of field goals per game. And, that's kind of the guy that I've drafted in a couple of leagues that I had to draft kickers in, which is actually becoming fewer and farther in between because a lot of leagues just aren't doing kickers and defenses because it's just not a lot of fun. So that's kind of my thought on kickers.
Thank you.
All right. Now going to the tight ends, another difficult position to find consistency and to do something after Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, George Kittle, and maybe TJ Hawkinson. Say, if we miss one of these in our draft, what should we do?
So do what I've been doing in most of the drafts that I've been in so far. Wait till about rounds 8 or 9, 9 or 10, depending if it's a 10 team, 12, 14, and draft Robert Tonyan and Logan Thomas, and you'll be fine. Because you'll get both of them were, if you look at last year, they were number 4 and number 5 in total points, and also 6th and 7th in consistency at around 63, 60, 65%. That's not great, but it's good enough. And what you want is just a good, decent scoring tight end. I mean, if you want to get Travis Kelce, that's fine, but you're going to have to pick him in the mid to late first round. If he falls to you at the end of the first round, like you're on the turn at 12-1, if Kelce falls to you, burn some incense or, have a sacrifice to the gods because you just got very lucky. If that happens, like I said, then certainly grab him. But most drafts I've been in, he does not even make it to like 11 or 10 or 11 or 12. And I get it. Last 2 years, his consistency combined, his like X consistency, which is, combining both the consistency and points per game. I mean, he's in the top 5 for wide receivers. So it's kind of hard to argue that you don't draft him then. So, if you're sitting in the 8th spot, 9th spot, and Kelce's there, just do it. I mean, it's going to look weird. You're going to really have to build your, down the road with other running backs, wide receivers. But I've done it a couple of times, and I was pretty happy with my team, because, again, you don't have to worry about tight end at all. You don't have to even waste a pick until maybe a backup somewhere down the road. But if you use the guide, use your information, and get the Russell Gages, John Browns, like I said, in those later picks, and get some maybe your 3rd, 4th, 5th receivers. There's some good solid running backs you can get in the rounds 2, 3, and 4. Your quarterback is quarterback. You'll get Dak or Kyler Murray or whoever you want. To be honest with you, if I was at the 12-1 tour, I might just go Kelce Mahomes and just call it a day. And I think I'd be all right with that.
Yeah.
Bob, there are some players that give us the impression that they have no consistency. Like you said, CH, or I look here and I found out about Chris Carson or Joe Mixon or even Miles Sanders, that all 3 of them were more than 50% consistent. Have you seen any of these players explode in years after they have already this consistency and the offense improves and they improves they improve enough to be RB1s and show the results?
Great question. I don't know if I've ever had that one, but I love it. Wow, what a good question. There have been some. Sometimes it does take a player a few years. A really good example, and the one that popped up in my head right away, was Derrick Henry. When Derrick Henry first came in the league, he would score quite a number of points, but he would be very inconsistent. And I think it was mostly because of the quarterback play that they had. So some teams would focus more on stopping him, and he'd have a bad game, and then they'd go against a bad running defense, and he would tear them up. But once Ryan Tannehill came into play, and they had at least somebody that could keep the defenses honest on the other side of the ball, Henry has been very consistent since then. So he's a perfect example. One, Amari Cooper is one on the wide receiver side, wasn't real consistent. In fact, we used to jokingly call him the fantasy locust because he would just eat teams alive every time you drafted him with his inconsistency. But last year, 75% was really on fire at the beginning of the year when Dak was playing. And I expect a lot from him this year. And I used to be like a hater of Amari Cooper. I used to curse him on Twitter when people would be like, "Oh, I'm going to draft him in the top 10." And again, that's the funny thing. People would draft him in the top 10 or there's a top 10 running or wide receiver for the last 3 years, even though the numbers would show that he wasn't worth going that high. And now after he had a good season last year, because CeeDee Lamb's there, now Amari Cooper's not getting any love at all, and I can get him as my wide receiver too. There is time. Sometimes it does take some either maturity on the quarterback or the team around him or the player. But there are every once in a while there will be a person that breaks out. But to be honest with you, it's few and far between. Like you mentioned, Mixon, Sanders, those kind of guys, they haven't proven it yet to me. I really have no desire to draft either one of those guys yet. And I think sometimes it's just the way the team's built. Mixon's a great running back. And if he had a great offensive line, like if he was running behind Cleveland's offensive line and he was on Cleveland's team, I think he would be a damn good running back there. Because they focus on the run. They're not a throwing team. They have a very good defense to keep teams in check. But he's playing for Cincinnati, who's got a terrible defense, a terrible offensive line. Joe Burrow proved that last year. He was running for his life most of the time. They didn't really improve that offensive line much. Their defense still stinks. So they're going to be throwing the ball 40 times a game, which is Joe Mixon's that's not his forte. So, it's just, again, sometimes it just takes the right personnel in the right places to get those guys to a breakout level. But it's again, I think it's fewer than you think. And so be careful with those two before you draft them.
Along these lines of running backs, what about a subject that has been mentioned in the fantasy football industry as something that can be the decisive factor in 2021? The sophomore running backs. Which of them stand out in the consistency factor? Jonathan Taylor, Cam Akers, CEH, all these guys.
Well, it's always interesting they bring them up because a lot of the guys don't have that problem. Zeke didn't have that problem. Kamara, McCaffrey, none of these guys had that problem. If you're good, you're good. And if you're on the right team, you're on the right team. Again, I think it kind of goes back to what I just kind of talked about with the other answer is the team around them going to give them that the best opportunity? Jonathan Taylor, I think, is the best example. He's on they've got a very good offensive line. Carson Wentz, whether or not he's better than Phillip Rivers, I'm not sure yet. But they're going to run the ball a lot, and Jonathan Taylor is going to be the beneficiary. They also have a very good defense, which means it's a lot of ball control in that game. They're not going to throw the ball as much. So I think he has, a much better chance of probably being that guy that easily breaks that sophomore slump. Now, guys like DeAndre Swift, CEH, I think is in the same boat as Taylor. Such a great team around him. You can't focus on him only. But guys like DeAndre Swift scare me a little bit because, again, the team around him isn't that good. They got Jared Goff now instead of Stafford. Their wide receivers, their number one wide receivers, either Tyrell Williams or Brashad Perriman. I can't even. It pains me to use the word wide receiver one and those guys in the same sentence. I feel like DeAndre Swift just has the potential for a lot of regression there because, look, the teams are going to be like, hey, there's only one guy on this team that's going to beat us, and that's DeAndre Swift. So let's just put 8 in a box and stop him. So I feel like, he's due for a down year. So Cam Akers, again, he didn't really blow me away. I mean, yeah, he had some nice games at the end of the year. I like him, but I'm going to draft David Montgomery in front of all these guys as my RB2. So I don't think I'm going to have too many shares of either of those guys on my teams this year, at least not Akers or Swift.
Perfect. Another question, but firstly, going back to the Lions, the wide receiver one there is the tight end, the PJ Hawk.
Okay, I'll give you that one. Give me that one.
So, right now the question. I needed to say that before. When it comes to injuries, from one year to another, how do you see the consistency, or you just throw a thing that you had away because of some severe injury or something close to that? For example, Carson, he really played well. However, he's always hurt during the season. And the other one is, for example, Barkley, that he's a beast, of course. You wouldn't... talent-wise, he's one of the best, but he's coming from a really nasty injury. So how do you put those injuries in the equation when it comes to consistency for the next year, for example?
Well, I think the most important thing is to go out there and find people on Twitter that are medical professionals that are in the fantasy world, whether whoever they are. I have a good friend, Brandon Bowers, who lives a couple hours from me. Physical therapist, medical doctor, or not physical therapist. Sorry, he's an actual doctor that does orthopedic surgeon. And those and see what those guys say and how the recovery works or doesn't work and the length of time. And I think that's what's important. Again, use the experts that are don't ask me for injury stuff because I don't know. I've torn both of my Achilles and my ACL. It took me forever to get back. No. But I think the key is, the one key that I've always kind of looked at is this person injury prone or just have bad luck? Remember when Keenan Allen had back-to-back years where I forget, he lacerated his kidney in one injury and then badly fractured his ankle or something. And, those aren't recurring injuries that misses games on and off. That is a boom. It happened. You're done. You come back. Like you said, the guys that scare me are guys like Chris Carson that seem to always miss 2, 3, 4 games a year. Dalvin Cook used to be that guy too. He played, he always missed 4 games a year. It was just the way it is. Like Christian McCaffrey, I don't have any doubts that he'll come back and be a beast. Barkley, 2 years in a row with this kind of stuff. They rushed him back too fast. The last one on that, that one injury that he's supposed to take 6 weeks and he was back in 3 and then just wasn't the same. Whether it's him or the team or whatever the case may be, those guys scare me more than the guys who have that one big, snap this, that, torn ACL for the year. But definitely look again, though, for when they get those surgeries done and the amount of time. There's nobody like Adrian Peterson. Nobody comes back and it rushes for 2,000 yards after tearing the ACL. That's because he's an alien. He's not from this world. That's not important. These other guys come back and it takes some time. I mean, yeah, these guys they're athletes and they have professional trainers but it's still a bad injury. I mean, it takes a while to get back to 100%, even for those guys. So I'm always a little cautious. Like Barkley's one of those guys that I just don't feel comfortable drafting this year. Like I need him to play a full season or at least 12 to 14 games in the season so that I can kind of feel comfortable that, yeah, okay, he's back to health. And, so if it gets to me and I got him or Zeke or him or Kamara, I'm probably going to go away from Barkley. I mean, I just feel like there's so many good choices at that spot that I'm probably going to go with a person that I feel like can stay healthy, be healthy, and move on. So Alien Peters, good answer.
Yeah. Well, Bob, that was awesome. We have hit the 1 hour mark. Fantasy Futebolista, Guilherme Gianni have asked you about the rookie consistency. We have talked about it. You can go back a few minutes to learn from it after the live will be recorded. You can watch all it back. So for our last messages, I'll thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you.
It was a huge pleasure. We have learned a lot, and I'll just pass the word for my colleagues to their final greetings, and then I'll just send some messages in Portuguese, and we'll wrap it up.
All right. Well, again, thank you guys for having me. It's an honor, and thanks again for being a part of the consistency guide and IDP. So for those of you out there that play in the IDP world, make sure you get the guide and go to chapter 11 there where we get into the IDP consistency. It's like 4 or 5 pages of just nonstop information. You guys did an amazing job this year. Thank you again for your contribution.
No, thank you. So let's talk to the man who is the responsible for this chapter. Rui Mauricio, your last messages for us. Thank you for being here with us, Big Boss. It was our pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much, my friends. Thank you, Bob. It's always an honor, and I'm very happy to have talked to you here, to have learned a little more. Good. And I hope to have you here many more times.
I'm always available whenever you guys need me. So thanks again.
Awesome. What about you, Sergio Luis? Yeah, he's muted.
I'd like to thank Bob. It was a real nice time and very learnful, I would say. And thank you very much for everything you said and you taught us tonight.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, Derek, thank you once again for co-hosting with me. It was a pleasure. Send us your last message for the night.
You Bob with us. Thank you, Andre, and everybody for the live. It was really fun. I really enjoyed a lot. I laughed a lot, and I learned a lot. And once again, thank you for the audience. Obrigado, galera, por toda a audiência aí. Also, thank you, Bob, for bearing with this accent. I'm really sorry. Once again.
No, that's fine. Well, it's like I'm being interviewed by Murph and Stocks. It's just,
So, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Okay, so thank you once again, Bob. I'll just send the last message in Portuguese and we'll wrap it up.
All right, thanks.
Bom, galera, muito obrigado pela audiência. Nas vagas do BRFF Bowl foram para todos aqueles que participaram, né? O Leonardo Lima, o Alain Bines e o Matheus Juste. Já estão dentro aí desse campeonato muito especial, o Scott Fishbowl brasileiro. Fiquem ligados porque amanhã sai a primeira edição do Pergunte ao BRFF, que é o nosso novo podcast semanal. Então, toda semana, um analista diferente aqui da equipe vai responder as suas perguntas. Chequem os posts no Twitter para mandar suas dúvidas para a gente. Os rankings Redraft 2.0 estão saindo do forno, com direito a textos e vídeos sobre o top 10 de cada posição, além de sleepers ou valores em rounds tardios. Também fiquem de olho, é muito conteúdo do BRFF. Muito obrigado, Sérgio, muito obrigado, Rui, muito obrigado, Derek, muito obrigado, Bob, e até a próxima, galera.